Hi everyone, I'm Pranoti, host of Under the Microscope. This series is brought to you by the Real Scientists Nano team. Our goal is to provide a platform where scientists can communicate their work and interact with the public. With that in mind, every week we introduce you to a scientist working in the field of materials or nanoscience, who tweets from the Real Scientists Nano Twitter account, which is realsci_nano. Hi everyone, I'm Pranoti. I am your host of Under the Microscope podcast series, and today we have with us Alexandra Brumberg, who is a postdoctoral researcher at the University of California, Berkeley. Hi Alexandra, how are you?
Hi Pranoti. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. After recording the short podcast, I'm really excited to speak with you, take a deeper dive in this longer podcast and extended conversation with you. So let's start by understanding your career so far. So how did you end up at Berkeley as a postdoc? Please tell us.
Okay, so how did I end up as a postdoc at Berkeley was the question.
Mm-hmm.
So actually I guess I have not that uncommon of a situation in academia anymore, but my husband and I are both researchers, and so when we were applying for postdocs, we were trying to get a position together. And so we both applied for postdoctoral fellowships together. And he actually ended up landing one at the University of California. So he's a Miller Fellow here. And I had also applied and kind of expressed my interest at working with Ting Xu. So I had expressed my interest in working with Ting Xu and written some fellowship applications with her. And even though those didn't end up panning out, she was still willing to hire me. And so both me and my husband were able to come to Berkeley together.
That sounds amazing. Wow. It does. You're really lucky that it worked out very well for both of you, because oftentimes it's either one of the partners gets a position and the other one has to wait a few months or so, or sometimes doesn't even get one. But I guess in Berkeley, considering, well, if I may ask, your husband, which area is he working in?
So he did his PhD in chemical engineering, and like me, he's also now doing a postdoc in materials science.
Okay.
So we kind of have somewhat similar interests, but like not really, because he's a computational chemist.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. Okay. Just to understand, because if the fields are completely different, oftentimes in smaller towns or smaller cities, it's a bit difficult. But I'm glad you both managed to find a position. Your current research, Alexandra, you're doing a postdoc now. Where does it fit in this big picture of materials and nanoscience? Because it is quite a broad field.
Yeah. So within my postdoctoral research, it is very materials focused, and definitely I think the group is often interested in like materials properties. But so the reason that I'm here is because I was really interested in looking at nanoparticle self-assembly. So I think this is kind of a really big area in the field of nanoscience right now, because when you organize or assemble nanoparticles, you can get emergent properties. So what that basically means is that nanoparticles on their own might have like one type of property, but when you assemble them into like a bigger grouping where there's some sort of periodic pattern, you get some other type of property that the individual nanoparticles don't exhibit on their own. And so this is really unique. It's kind of it's a way of creating kind of new materials properties and chemical properties. And so this is something that I wanted to learn how to do. So one of the ways in which you can guide nanoparticle self-assembly is using polymers. And so that's kind of how I ended up here. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. So have you always, also during your PhD, did you also work on the self-assembly nanoparticles, or was that like a shift?
No, so it was a really big shift. Yeah, so in my PhD, I really did very little work with nanoparticles. So we were a spectroscopy lab, so I was really just measuring the nanoparticle properties. And like I said, it was more focused on electronic properties rather than structural properties. Um, and so really for my postdoc, that's kind of I mean, I made a really big switch, but that's kind of why I was interested in making it was for my faculty position, if I get one, what I'd really like to be able to do is both be able to make and measure materials. So kind of be able to make interesting novel materials and then like measure their responses and see. I really would like to be able to use external stimuli. So some of the things that I talked about, not necessarily magnets or sound waves, but I'm more interested in using light as an external stimulus. Use light to induce structural responses that lead to optoelectronic responses in the materials. So I think these things are all kind of interconnected. And so it might seem like my path is a little bit wonky, but I think that there's like a bigger plan that I have at the end.
It makes complete sense. It's all connected. It all comes down to the materials and their shape or like their properties. If I play with nanomaterials and want to poke them, want to see what they do when you shine light on them, when you put magnetic field around them, when you put
Yeah.
current through. You basically want to do everything with nanomaterial. Can we just say that you want to do
Yes, exactly. I have a lot of different interests.
Exactly. Let's go with that. And not just play with the nanomaterials, but you also want to prepare the nanomaterials. Uh,
Yeah.
so like the whole thing. Okay, excellent. That sounds really, really cool. And your PhD work and also your current research, it sounds very, very interesting. So this is a mean question, okay? I know before asking this, just a heads up. If you have to pick one research project that you're most proud of, or the most fun or quirky one, could you pick one and explain it to us in simple words in the section we call In Other Words?
Yeah. So yeah, there was this one project that I did in my PhD that I feel like was a lot of fun, but really challenging. I started it in my first year, and it kind of continued through my second and my third year, where I got to go to the National High Magnetic Field Lab in Los Alamos, New Mexico.
Wow.
And what they do there is they basically have really, really powerful magnets. And so what we were doing was trying to understand the size of the exciton in these rectangular shaped nanoparticles that I was working with. So the exciton is basically the electron hole pair in the nanoparticles. So it's basically this positive and negative charge in a nanoplatelet. And by passing the magnetic field through the nanoplatelet, we could get a sense of that. But we needed these really powerful magnetic fields to do it. And the reason that the project was so challenging was because there were a lot of different components to it. So there was an aspect of sample prep to it where we had to basically align these nanoparticles, kind of orient them to make sure that they were all aligned perpendicular relative to the magnetic field, and that kind of took a lot of chemistry knowledge. And then there was kind of the more like physical component of actually getting all of the sample loaded into the magnet. And because these are high magnetic fields, there are these giant magnets. You have to cool them down to 4 Kelvin. It sounds like a gun when it goes off. Like it's just, I mean, there are these really cool user facilities. But it was a kind of a very stressful environment to be in because you have, 1 week to go out there and get your experiment done. And then you're doing all of your data processing on the fly. So I had to kind of code a script up in MATLAB to make sure that all of our data processing was getting done as we were doing all of these other things as well. And then when we actually got back to Northwestern, actually figuring out what was going on required kind of learning a bunch of physics that I wasn't really familiar with. So this project was kind of at the intersection of like chemistry and physics and material science. So I really felt like it was, at the edge of all of these different fields. And as a result, I kind of felt like I wasn't good at any of them.
Oh, no.
But when it was like finally published, I really felt like it was a really cool piece of work because it combined all of these different aspects. And so it's something that I'm really proud of as a result of that.
That sounds amazing. And yes, it is very, very, it's like beam time, right? It's very, very stressful.
That's exactly what it's like, yeah.
24-hour shifts. I mean, not really, it depends on the group and the experiments you want to do. But that sounds like a really cool research project. I hope you have lots of pictures from the facility if you're allowed to take pictures, and you can show them while you're tweeting from the Twitter account.
Yeah, I don't have pictures that I took, but I have I have some that I can pull from Google Images that I showed people of what it looked like, because if you know what an NMR machine looks like, it's kind of like that, but like bigger.
Oh my God, bigger than an NMR? Oh God, that is, whew. NMRs are in these giant warehouses. That's what I remember. But yeah, looking forward to those pictures. And so, Alexandra, after speaking with you so far, I have the feeling that you really enjoy the research aspect of being a scientist, but there are also a lot of other things that come along with being a scientist. So what else do you enjoy?
Yeah, so one of the other things that I really enjoy is doing outreach. And so I've been involved in a lot of different outreach efforts, both in undergrad and in grad school, and now as well as a postdoc at UC Berkeley. So one of the ones that I'm the most passionate about, and if you follow me on Twitter, you've definitely seen me post about it before, is I'm on the advisory board of this nonprofit called Letters to a Pre-Scientist, where basically we work with middle school classrooms where we match the students with professional scientists as pen pals, and then they write letters back and forth to each other throughout the school year. And I feel like it's a really effective program because oftentimes when you do science outreach, it's like you go to a classroom and you do some sort of science demo and then you kind of just leave and you never see the students again. And so it's kind of this one-time thing. But with Letters to a Pre-Scientist, you get this interaction that lasts like a full school year. And so you really get to work with the students more long-term, and it's really individualized, right? So like each kid gets matched with a scientist who's chosen specifically for their interests, right? So it's like we match someone who likes video games with someone else who likes video games, and then they get really excited to talk about video games because they didn't know that scientists like to play video games too. So I've really enjoyed being a part of this outreach organization. I've been on the advisory board for 4 years now. And yeah, I mean, it's just been something that's been really fulfilling, and it's been really awesome also to like watch the program grow. So I started when I think it was only working in like 12 different classrooms, and next year we're going to be working in 50 classrooms.
Oh, that sounds so cool. Oh my God, I would have loved to write letters with a scientist when I was a kid.
Yeah.
That sounds amazing. And ask all kinds of questions, because in my head, I remember scientists when I was growing up, scientists were like, oh my God, they know everything. They know everything. They know how to code. They know how to do blood tests, like everything, in the movies, and these really cool scientists, and they can make a robot and they can make everything.
That's like one of the goals of the program is to humanize scientists and like help these kids realize that like, we're just people too. And like, on the one hand, like we are really cool because like we do know a lot, but we also don't know everything. And so like, it's okay for them to feel like, they don't have to feel like they have to know everything in order to become a scientist, because like we don't know everything either. And so I feel like that's really important, because otherwise it can feel like it's, impossible to become a scientist, but actually like no, it's possible, and like if you have this interest, then you can go ahead and do it.
Yeah, Absolutely, absolutely. So, Alexandra, if you were to start out today, like speaking of kids and everything, if you were to start your scientist journey today, what advice would you give yourself, or what advice would you give to scientists who are starting out today?
Yeah, so the advice I do give people all the time is that um, it's really important to make sure that the advisor that you choose is someone that you really connect with. So I think often, when graduate students are choosing their lab, they're really focused on making sure to find like the perfect research fit. Um, and I definitely think that like research is important to think about. But the thing that I like to point out is that I think like we're in science because we're already curious about things, and like as long as you're not going to join a lab that's like totally the opposite of what you would want to do, right? So like if you're a physical chemist, like you're not going to join an organic synthesis lab, right? But like as long as you're looking in like roughly an area that you're interested in, chances are you're going to be able to work on the science that is present in a bunch of different labs. But I think my experience has been, and I think this is true for a lot of people, it's really hard to kind of force a connection with somebody that isn't a good mentor or that you don't really connect with naturally. Um, Versus it's, I think, really easy to fall in love with a lot of different types of science. Like we're naturally curious people, and like that's what we're in science for. And so I think that um, there I think that like there should be a lot more focus placed in like making sure that you find a good fit for you in terms of an advisor and a research group rather than finding like that perfect research question. And I was like really lucky in my undergraduate. I kind of like ended up in the right lab by chance. But for graduate school, like that's exactly what I did. I kind of chose my lab purely based on my advisor. And I think it really worked out for me. I had a really good fit with my advisor, and I knew that the way that he mentored and that the way that he kind of gave us a lot of projects was exactly like how I liked to do science. And that made my graduate experience a lot more enjoyable than a lot of my other peers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very, very, very sound pieces of advice there. That sounds really good, and thank you very much for sharing that. Um, Alexandra, it sounds to me that your research experience so far has been wonderful, and I hope it will continue to be wonderful in the future as well. However, if you had three wishes to improve your research experience, what would you ask for? And I'm not promising anything here, okay?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think my postdoc research experience hasn't been necessarily as positive. I think in part because I made such a big switch. And I think maybe I made like too big of a switch. But yeah, so right now I'm actually looking for a new postdoc position. So I kind of I'll have like 1 year in this research lab, but then after that, like I'll be switching. And so I'm hopeful that like I'll be able to find a new lab that will work out really well, and that there will be kind of as good a research fit as I had for my grad work. And then like looking ahead to my faculty position, as I said, like I came to UC Berkeley with my husband, and so for the faculty job search, we're going to have to find two positions, and I think that's something that's really challenging. There's obviously success stories, but there's also a lot of stories of people who didn't necessarily have the easiest time going through it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that's I think really stressful and has been really nerve-wracking and on our minds a lot lately. So I think, if we could just be guaranteed a dual hire, that would be amazing. And then I think the eternal wish for all researchers is just to have unlimited time. If I could just get everything done perfectly and yeah, just not have to sacrifice anything for anything else, that would be great.
That is absolutely. I completely agree with you there. And all three actually are realistic wishes, including I would say the third one, which is more time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, they are quite realistic. I hope you get you find a postdoc position or a faculty position that you want. I hope you get one, and I hope your husband also gets a position if it is somewhere not in Berkeley, not in California or so, not nearby, basically. I really hope that happens. And hopefully, then we can have you on the podcast again when you're in your new role. That would be awesome. I have really enjoyed our conversation, get to know you, get to know your research. But before I let you go, I have one last question for you, Alexandra, and that is, what are your learnings from this different era, the new era that we are living in, which kick-started at the beginning of 2020?
Yeah, I I tried to think of a good answer for this, and I didn't really have one aside from just wearing a mask. Yeah, definitely don't go into work when you're sick. But yeah, I guess more seriously, I think it has shown us that, you can take time off to relax if you need to. I was always surprised by that, I think, when I was a kid, that like, you can get sick and take a few days off and like the world doesn't stop. And I think that that's something that like we can keep in mind as researchers, that like if you are feeling overwhelmed or if you get sick, like you are allowed to take a day or two off and it'll be okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and I think we should remember that even if it seems like we're at the end of the pandemic, but for other health, any kind of illnesses, physical or mental, I think we should definitely remember that the world does not stop. It did stop, the whole world stopped, and then
that is true.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Alexandra. As I said, this has been lovely, and looking forward to having you on Real Scientist Nano.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it as well.
Thank you for listening. I also want to thank my team, Johanna, who is our news editor and curator liaison, Swenya, who is our podcast engineer and curator liaison, Lucia, who is our media and website coordinator, and myself, Pranoti, being the owner of the Science Talk and host of Under the Microscope. To know more about us, visit our website, thesciencetalk.com, and follow us on Twitter at realsci_nano.